That's often not.
Good evening, Earth. This is Adam Sturch, broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico. Working on oil painting Chinese food, bucket scoop prelude to the apocalypse. Tonight we're just going to do some line work on the clouds. I've got some ivory black mixed up with a little bit of linseed oil and a little bit of the Payne's Gray blue and crimson from earlier. So it's just a pretty much pitch black. So I'm going to start in with the window and have clouds kind of flowing out from the window pane, and then work those into the figures as well a little bit. So here we go.
The human body is only 17 or 80%. There's a rapid period of development, or a period of rapid development. So there are times in the first year of life when literally every second, so consider this space of time. In that space of time, 1 billion connections are made. So it's a highly sensitive period. And the environment decides or influences which circuits will survive and which circuits get pruned out. The babies get many more circuits than they need, many more connections than they need. It's a little jumble. If you looked at an EEG of an infant, and you didn't know it was an infant, you thought it was an adult, you would be looking at a dying person. And the brain gets totally disorganized. That's what the baby's brain is like. Except, due to the influence of the environment, all that disorganization turns into organization, and the circuits that are not needed get pruned out. That's called synaptic pruning. And the ones that need to be there get wired in and strengthened and connected and reconnected and developed into systems and circuits and so on. But all that depends upon the right environment. Now think about tuning up. So let me answer this question. If I were to stress one of you right now, be inappropriate, physically or emotionally intrusive or aggressive, what would be your options? Well, your options would be any one of three healthy options. You can simply stand up and say, don't do that. You can just stand up and fight back and assert yourself, right? Yeah. What you do is just walk out to the door. Say, listen, I didn't come here to be abused. I put this workshop. Just walk out. Your third option would be, if you couldn't do the first two, is that given that there's 50 or so people here in the room with you, you could ask for help. But what now if you couldn't escape, fight back, or ask for help? Then how would your brain handle it? Well, one of the ways your brain would handle it would be to tune it out, so that to protect yourself from the pain of it. So the tuning out again is a survival technique. But what happens if you're an infant and your parents are stressed, which means that you're stressed, because you're picking up on your parents' stress. So that your parents are stressed and you're stressed, can you fight back, escape, or ask for help? You can. What do? You tune out. You tune out when your brain is developing. You tune out when every second 1 billion connections are being made. And then the tune out is wired into your brain. It becomes the default setting of your brain. And 7 years later, you're diagnosed with ADHD. Genetic disease. The heck it is. Furthermore, your dopamine circuits, those motivational circuits, didn't develop either. So now you need a dopamine medication like Ritalin or Dexedrine to help you focus and to get things done. Simply because your early environment was so stressed. Now, when it comes to FASD and ADHD, first of all, you can notice that all the behavioral traits of ADHD are also true of the behavioral traits of FASD. Poor impulse control, lack of emotional separation, hyperactivity, low ability to concentrate. Now, alcohol, of course, and this is an expansion of what I said last night, alcohol, of course, is a toxin. It affects the brain, as you've been hearing all day, I'm sure. And when it's present in large quantities, it'll have drastic effects on the physiology of the child. Heart abnormalities, facial abnormalities, brain abnormalities that you can see on brain scans, and so on. But in a lot of kids affected by the spectrum, You don't see these traits at all. You just see the behaviors and the emotional dysfunction. I think it's a mistake to assume that it's all because of the alcohol. Because, everything I've said about the parents of the child with ADHD is also true of the parents of the child with FASD. Any woman who drinks is by definition a stressed woman. That's why she drinks. The alcohol is an attempt, it's her attempt to soothe her emotional pain that usually goes back to her own trauma as a child, which she's been carrying all her life. Because she was trauma, and that's not my opinion, the large-scale studies again show that the more adversity there in childhood, in other words, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, and all these other factors like parental absence or violence in the family and so on,
No.
the greater the risk of alcoholism.
I was thinking of bending them around the
greater the risk of
contours
addiction,
of the figure,
and so on and so forth.
but that doesn't really work.
So the alcoholic
I'm going to fix these. I'm going to try to.
is simply
A
somebody
little bit wet.
who was traumatized as a child and is using the alcohol to soothe their emotional pain and
So it's
to
gonna
get
get
their
them
mind
to
into a more acceptable state.
Okay. Workable.
Likely, of course, if they had those experiences in childhood, they have not created for themselves a stress-free environment as adults either. More than likely, they'll be in a relationship with a male alcoholic, perhaps, or in an abusive relationship, and in many ways leading a life that's full of stress. Now, is it just the alcohol that's affecting that infant in the uterus? Heck no. It's also all the stress on the woman, for the same reasons I've already explained. And that child is not born into a happy environment. So if the parents are drinkers, that child is born into a highly stressed and unstable environment. So all those years of brain development are occurring under conditions of high stress, having that impact on a child's brain circuits. So what I'm saying is that the relationship between FASD and ADHD is very simple. They both come from the same source. Stress in the parenting environment. And with the addition that in the fetal alcohol syndrome situation, you also have the added effect of alcohol to lesser or greater degrees. But the significant difference is between perspectives is that if we recognize that a lot of it has to do with stress and its biological effects, then we also know that the brain can undergo new development even later on in life. And that is what is called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity, the capacity of the brain to develop new circuits later on in life, given the right conditions. So I mentioned last night the studies done in Berkeley with rats, where they took rats with at different ages, young, adult, newborns, and they even took some old ones. They even took some rats at birth and deliberately brain damaged them. And then they exposed these animals to different levels of environmental stimulation. And 2 months later, at any age, at any stage, and even the deliberately brain damaged rats, if they're exposed to more nourishing environmental stimulation, social stimulation, they're better able to find their way out of a maze, they're smarter. And when you autopsy them, in the front part of the brain, they have larger nerve cells, with more connections, and richer blood supply. In other words, the environmental stimulation led to positive changes in the very physiology and structure of the brain. This is true of the old rats, this is true of the really brain damaged rats. Which is to say that the key to working with these kids is the environment. And what is the key environmental factor? It's what was missing in the first place. Unconditional, non-stress, attuned interaction with caregiving adults. Let me tell you what attunement is. Because attunement is what was missing for these kids. And it was missing because the parents were too distracted or stressed. Attunement is being on the same wavelength. Being in tune with. Being in tune. Emotional. So attunement is when you're in a certain emotional state and somebody who's attuned to you will get it and share it and reflect that back to you. So this is something that as babies we do instinctively. It's no big deal. It's not a big technique. It's simply something we do instinctively as human beings, as long as we're present. So with a baby who's upset, the 3-month-old who's crying, we will attune. We will not do what we'll do with each other or with an older child. We will not say something stupid like, get over it, it can't be that bad. We will not say, hey, the 3-month-old, think of the starving millions in the third world. What are you whining about? Your diapers, but so what? We're going to do that. We're going to pick them up and we're going to go, oh. And what our facial and tone, facial expression and tone of voice and body language is conveying is, hey kid, you're sad. I get that you're sad, and I'm sad that you're sad. And then the kid can, hey. That's how the functions of the adult brain regulates the brain of the child. So these kids need a lot of attunement. Now, imagine what it's like for you. You're sitting there upset, and somebody slaps your shoulders and says, cheer up, it can't be that bad. I mean, even as adults, we get infuriated. But kids need attunement much more because they're much more dependent on their relationship, and particularly these kids do, because they've never had it. So there was a study done with mothers and children, small children, put into separate rooms, but broadcast to one another by means of closed-circuit television. So the mother would see the child on the screen, and the child would see the mother on the screen. And the child would wave, and the mother would wave back, and the child would wrinkle up her nose, make a funny face, and the mother would copy her. And everybody's very happy until they turn off the live feed, and they replay for the child the video of the mother that was just made. She's still smiling, loving gestures, friendly, intimate expressions, being playful and funny. But the child gets upset very quickly. And why do you suppose? Because the mother is no longer responsive. It doesn't matter that the mother is loving and friendly. What matters is that the child is not responding to the parent, the mother is not responding to the child. So these kids need a lot of attunement to emotion. Go back to that situation in Toronto. The human brain, or the human nervous system, has 3 responses to challenge. One of them is the primitive reptilian response, which is embedded in the lower part of the brain, which is to freeze. That's called immobilization. It involves physical stillness, so that it won't be noticed, and dissociation. So the mice, when caught by a mouse, when caught by a cat, will actually dissociate. Sure, I didn't open the door, so you didn't believe on it. So, a mouse, when caught by a cat, will actually dissociate, and then it's not so bad to eat. That's called immobilization. That's a primitive reptilian response, but it's in our brains. The second level of response is mobilization. A lot of adrenaline, and the heart rate goes up, and you're going to fight or escape. That's the sympathetic nervous system, mammalian flight or fight response. Those are defensive states. There's no learning that happens in those states. Well, these kids, because they were traumatized early or they were just stressed early, from uterus onwards, are in constant defensive mode. They're constantly in defensive mode. They're either in immobilization mode or they're in hypermobilization mode when they can't learn. So they don't learn from anything that happens. They keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. They can't help it because there's no learning in those defensive states. Learning only happens in a state called social engagement. Social engagement involves different nerves, different facial muscles, different neck muscles, and so you look at somebody You look them in the eye, you listen to their voice, and you interact. In that social engagement mode, learning can take place. But these kids have to be got to that state. So for that, they need a lot of safety. Here in the temporal lobe, on each side of the brain, we have sensors. Just like the thermostat. Basically, these sensors read the safety of the situation. We're constantly assessing safety. We're all doing this all the time. We're assessing safety. When we're not safe, we respond in different ways. The problem, of course, is that when the early environment was difficult, stressful, or traumatic, our proper ability to assess safety may not develop well. So sometimes we'll put ourselves in situations that are not safe and think that they are. And that's why the women traumatized often go into very unsafe relationships. And sometimes we don't see safety when it's there. So we're not able to relax even when we're safe. So a lot of extra input has to happen to make these kids feel safe. And that's why the attunement is so important. Without that attunement, their brain never relaxes. It's always in defensive mode. When it's in defensive mode, it can't learn. So no adaptation happens, no development happens. And that's why the essential condition for development is unconditional loving acceptance, attunement, support, and the presence of the adults. Not all the techniques that there's nothing wrong with techniques. But as the spiritual teacher Krishnamurti wrote, and which quote I used in the beginning of two of my books, he says, action is meaning only in relationship, and without understanding relationship, action on any level will only breed conflict. The understanding of relationship is infinitely more important than the search for any plan of action. The understanding of relationship is infinitely more important than the search for a plan of action. So let me give you an example. These kids are often very oppositional. They resist, right? You can diagnose them with oppositional defiant disorder. Now here's the thing about oppositionality. You might put your hand up for me, please. So what are you doing when I push it? And how do I push? Yeah, right. Cheating, you know? So the harder I push, the harder you push back. Okay? That's a natural human resistance to coercion. There's a natural human resistance to coercion, physical or emotional. My friend Gordon Dufeld calls that counter-rebellion. Okay? Nothing wrong with it. Now, when we say that a kid is oppositional, we're saying something about that. But in this interaction between Denise and I, she wasn't alone. I was there too. I was pushing on her. That's why she pushed back. Why would I diagnose her with being oppositional? Instead of looking at the relationship. Now there's oppositionality, it's not a trait of the child. It's a function of the relationship. Now what mitigates oppositionality is relationship, right? If you and I were in a different relationship, you might want me in your life. You know, there's some people that do want you in your life. You know, so, and many others that you don't. So what mitigates oppositionality is relationship. If I mistake your oppositionality for some innate trait of yours, and I try to change it behaviorally by pushing harder on you, you're just going to push harder back. If I want you not to be a bit oppositional, I have to build a relationship. That's the key with these kids. When we just try to focus on the behaviors, we do harm. That's what Krishna already said. Without understanding relationship, any plan of action will only breed conflict. Now think of the time off situation, the separation. When you say to a 3-year-old, okay, time out, what are we saying? We're saying to the child, you know kid, I know what your biggest need is. Your biggest need is the attachment relationship in which you can feel safe and nurtured with me. And hence, I also happen to know what your biggest fear is, which is the loss of that relationship. And you know what? I'm going to use that against you every time I don't like what you do. Are we increasing the child's sense of safety, or are we decreasing? We're getting the behavior that we want, because the kids, oh yeah, okay, I'll be good. And the 3-year-old can't stand the separation from the parent, unless they're already detached. So, the issue with ADHD, FASD, any of these related childhood conditions is not short-term behavioral goals, but long-term developmental goals. If we understand that we're not talking about a disease here, but we're talking about a problem of development, then the question we'll be asking at every turn is not what will promote good behavior in the second, but what will promote healthy development in the long term. And the things that we do to get the healthy or the desired behavior in the short term very often completely undermine the long-term behavior, developmental goal. And unfortunately, the medical schools don't teach this. The faculties of education, I'm sure, don't teach it. They sure didn't when I went to educational school, when I was a teacher for a year. And I don't think they do now. And they don't teach in the schools of psychology either, which means we're constantly misreading kids. We're not seeing what matters. We're not looking at their emotional experience. I'm going to stop here for a moment, or stop talking steadily. What time is the session finish? 4:30. 4:30, okay. Let me stop you for questions now. Any comments or questions? Yeah.
Okay.
Numerous times in the play, what's that, the medical community, education community, and the medical, in some cases of parenting, and I guess our political system is such that these things aren't being taught. When I talked about research being in place that was established in this case, and this kind of process. How do we make that connection?
Yeah, well, the good news is that this information is getting out more and more. At least now we have this article in this month's journal, pediatrics journal. Now, let me tell you, it's going to get ignored by a lot of people. I was speaking in Calgary at Calgary Children's Hospital, I think probably 2 weeks ago today, and this article had just come out, and I was talking to the doctors there, and I was saying all this stuff. They said, look, here it is. Right here, I was very pleased because, it's right there. In their journal. This response I got. And I said pretty much what I told you today. So blind. It was blind. Didn't know what to do with it. Part of the problem is that I could put the problem into the lap of the medical profession, because we're just not training people the way we should. Of course, the influence of the pharmaceutical companies has a lot to do with it, because the research is mostly funded by pharmaceuticals. This research was not, but most research is. There's no profits to be made in nurturing relationships. Lots of profits to be made in certain drugs. So what is printed in the medical journals is stuff that's funded by people who've got a profit motive. That's an obvious fact. The fact that a lot of people that go into medical school are people who are very stressed and workaholics and all that, they haven't dealt with their own stuff, that also contributes to it. But it's beyond that. We live in a culture that's separates the mind from the body. And since you asked a political question, I'll give you a political answer. The essence of this society is the profit motive. For the sake of the profit motive, we have to treat people like commodities. So people are fundamentally wealth-producing or wealth-consuming creatures, but they don't have any other function. And in a situation, and the schools actually, the way we have them now, you know where they developed? They developed in Prussia in the 19th century, where they were industrializing, and they needed a docile and obedient, but intelligent and educated working force. So they developed these schools where kids sit there all day and hands behind their back.
Maybe I should subtitle it, "There's no profit to be made in nurturing
That wasn't designed to these as
relationships."
a child of mine. Wouldn't their right mind design a school
Cuddly
system
theme.
where kids have to sit at a desk?
But anyway, that gets the clouds pretty much set in. I may add a few more, but I'm going to let that all set up before I start doing in white highlights and fluffifying them some. But not all completely horizontal. I was thinking about taking the straight edge to it, but honestly, I think it'll work out once I get them filled. And yeah,
learn at the same rate, at the same time, at the same age, in the same way. No child was ever like that. And instead of saying, well, the
Fun.
school system ought to
That's
be
it for the moment, though, so thank you for watching. That's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion House, New Mexico, working on oil painting Chinese food. Buck a scoop, prelude to the apocalypse. Have a good night, Earth.
And if we did, we'd have a very different situation in the classroom. And in the school.